Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. I am Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna Church. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. This is Wednesday night Bible study. I'm so happy that you chose to hang out with me tonight. We got a neat study for you guys. Thank you. I want to say welcome to everybody that's joining us online and being part of the conversation. Don't forget, if you are online and you have not yet subscribed, be sure to do that. You can press the subscribe button there and also the bell so that you're notified. And certainly if you enjoy the message, if you enjoy the study, you can send it out to somebody. You can certainly give us some comments. Let us know what you think about it. Or if you have any questions, we'll do our best to try to get back to you and answer whatever questions that you do have. So we started a study last week. Actually, let's start off with a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right into this. Father, as we say always, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. All right, so as I said, we started a study last week. We did just the introduction. We're going to be talking about the gospel for a little bit, at least a few weeks. But we've been doing a study on the weekend services. We've been going through the Gospel of John and really the acceptable year of Yah. The year of the Master's ministry. And I was hoping to get to chapter 10 by this past week, but, just time-wise, it didn't work out. And of course, you know that this week is the week of Hanukkah. And certainly there are many around the world that are celebrating Hanukkah. Many of our Jewish brethren, if not all of our Jewish brethren, are celebrating Hanukkah all around the world. And so I thought it would be, and again, I wanted to do this on our weekend services, but just the way time worked out, I figured let's do it here on our Wednesday. Let's talk about Hanukkah a bit today, and not just Hanukkah, but how it fits into the whole story of Yeshua. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because for all of us that have begun to open up our eyes, to begun to understand that the commandments are for us, that everything Yeshua said absolutely does apply, that that Yah's word is eternal, and we're starting to try to obey it. One of the things I've noticed, or one of the things certainly that I went through, and I think most of us have gone through, is we all sort of, I don't want to say this in an incorrect way, but we erred. We've all erred. We've all made mistakes. We've all done some things that we weren't supposed to do, and that's the story of our entire lives. However, even as we've begun to come to truth, there's things you have to learn, and there's things that you think are okay and right and good, and you do them. And then, later on down the road, you begin to learn some more, you begin to experience some more, Yah begins to open up your mind to things, and you realize, oh my goodness, wait a minute, what I was doing is not to use to coin a term, well, not to coin a term, but to use a term, it's not exactly kosher. And so we've done things, we've been involved in things, we've said things that, later on we begin to understand, wait a minute, maybe that's not the exact way that we should be doing it, or exactly what we should be saying, or exactly what we should be celebrating, or how we should be celebrating. There's some obvious stuff that we found out, obvious stuff that we came into contact with. We know that there are things and holidays we should absolutely not be part of. Those were pretty obvious. Those were probably one of the initial things that we understood, be it the winter solstice, be it the spring equinox, or that type of stuff. We sort of wrapped our minds around that. But there's other things that kind of snuck up on us that it took us a little time to really understand. And Hanukkah is absolutely one of them. So I want to, in all sensitivity, try to share what I understand from the scripture about Hanukkah. I certainly don't want to be offensive to anybody, but I want to share truth for us, at least the way I understand it. Certainly you test it, you go to Yah and you ask him to lead and guide you. But I want to share some information with you today that I think is very, very important. And so the title and the topic for today, of course, is entitled Yeshua and Hanukkah. Yeshua and Hanukkah. Real simple title, but really, really important information. So let's sort of jump right into this, if we would, or if we could. Here is some scripture, and we're gonna go through a whole bunch of stuff. We're gonna talk about Hanukkah. This isn't gonna actually be an extensive study on what Hanukkah is, because I've talked about this before. We've learned about this before. Most of you that have been following the ministry here, you've heard some of this stuff before. So what I want to kind of do is give a bit of an overview, but I want to put the concept or the question out there: did Yeshua celebrate Hanukkah? That's certainly something I think we really need to understand. So here it is. I want to give you a couple of different versions. Our main text for today comes out of the Gospel of John, chapter 10 and verse 22. Now, I want to give it to you in multiple versions so that you can see. Now, of course, listen, if you ask, I guess it depends on who you ask, you'll get all sorts of answers. You will get people within the Hebrew roots, the Torah movement, that will say, absolutely not. Yeshua did not celebrate Hanukkah. Impossible, did not happen. Then you'll have other groups that will say, yes, there it is, right there in the scripture. Yeshua celebrated Hanukkah. He was there for the Feast of Dedication. I want to try to weave in between those and try to find out what the truth actually is and explain that. So here is John chapter 10 and verse 22. Now, the first one up there, and let me make this just a little bit bigger for everybody to see. The first one that's up there is the Scriptures version. I want to give it to you in a couple of different versions so that you kind of get an idea or a flavor of how this one verse has been interpreted. Here's John chapter 10 and verse 22, and it says, "Others said, 'These are not the words of one possessed by a demon.'" Of course, they're talking about Yeshua, the things that he's saying. "These are not the words of one possessed by a demon. Is a demon able to open the eyes of the blind?" At that time, Hanukkah came to be in Jerusalem, and it was winter. Now that's the Scriptures version. That's the version that we normally use here, very often use. I mean, we sort of skirt through a couple of different versions, but predominantly we've been using the Scriptures version most of the time. Now here is the King James. So people would look at that and say, well, look, there it is. It's telling us right in the text that Yeshua was at Jerusalem for Hanukkah. There it is, right there in the text. Here's the NKJV, the New King James Version. It's almost identical to the King James Version, but here's what verse 22 says in that version. "Others said, 'These are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?' Now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch." Now, there, of course, in the Scriptures version, it says the word Hanukkah, and certainly here in the King James Version, it uses what Hanukkah actually means. Hanukkah means to dedicate or dedication. So it says it was the Feast of Dedication, and of course, it was winter. So there's two versions now, two seemingly different versions, and yet they seem to be saying the same thing, that it was during the Feast of Dedication that this stuff was going on, or that this, chapter 10, the rest of chapter 10 goes on, which seems to, at least on its surface, seems to solidify the concept or the idea that, Yeshua was there for Hanukkah. He celebrated Hanukkah. Hanukkah's something that, that he gave validity to by being there. Let's look at tongue-tied a little bit. Let's look at a couple of other versions. Here is the ESV version, very, very similar. It says, "These are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? At that time, the Feast of Dedication," so here it is again, "the Feast of Dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So this is the ESV version, but sort of similar in that it is calling it the Feast of Dedication. And again, remember, dedication in Hebrew is to Hanukkah something. Well, here's the Hebrew Gospels. And I want you to notice this because, oh boy, we got a problem here. Here's the Hebrew Gospels, some of the oldest, first century concepts, ideas. This is in Hebrew. It's in its original language. And listen to what this says. But others said, these words are not from a man who has a demon, or whom a demon holds onto. Or is Satan able to open the eyes of the blind? Very similar so far. These things were said in Jerusalem, and it was winter, as Yeshua was walking in the sanctuary in the porch of Shlomo. Now, I hope you noticed the difference there in the Hebrew Gospels as compared to some of our more modern translations. You'll notice that it says absolutely nothing about the Feast of Dedication. All it says is that these things were done in Jerusalem, and then it says, and it was winter. Oh boy, we got a problem here, because there is an absolute discrepancy then between this version, this translated version from the Hebrew, and a lot of the other English from the Latin text, Greek text, all the other ones that have funneled down to English. There's a difference, and well, you know what? If you think about that difference in language, it's a conundrum. It's a problem. It's an issue. How do we square that circle? What is actually being said? What's the truth? Was Yeshua there for the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah? Or does Hanukkah have nothing to do with what was going on as to why Yeshua was there? Well, big question, really, really big question, and we really need to understand it. But before we really dive into that answer, if you would, there's some background stuff that we need to kind of go through and make sure that we have some knowledge about. And so I want to give you a summary of Hanukkah. This is in no way an in-depth, study about what Hanukkah was, what actually happened, the whole story. I want to give you sort of the Cliff Notes version. I want to give you enough information that at least you have an idea. And again, if you've been part of the ministry here, if you've been listening to my teachings for a while, we've talked about Hanukkah before. But just for summary, let's look at the Cliff Notes version of what the story of Hanukkah is actually about. So, number one, first of all, if you really want to read the story of what Hanukkah is really about, go to the book of Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. The story's there. All the information's there. You can read it. It's in the Apocrypha. Depends upon what Bible you've got. If you don't have that, you can certainly go online. You can get the Apocrypha books, look up 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and read through it yourself. And you will definitely read the account as written by those sometime after the fact, but fairly close after the fact of the events that happened as to what the account of things actually was. And you'll find out all the details about Hanukkah. But I'm not going to go through all the Apocrypha and give you all sorts of scriptures of the Apocrypha. You guys can do that on your own if you really feel so led that you want to get some more information. So you can go and get the written account. But here's sort of I want to give you the prophetic end of it a little bit, but also the real practical end. This Hanukkah is about the Greek Empire, which, don't forget, and on the notes there, it is the 5th beast listed in the book of Revelation, but it's the 3rd beast in Daniel's vision of the big statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreams, the statue of all the Gentile nations. It is Greece. Remember, it's Babylon, and then it's Medo-Persia, and then it's Greece. So in Daniel's vision, it's the 3rd beast, But in the way the book of Revelation talks about it, including Egypt and Assyria, it winds up to be the fifth beast. They're the same entity in both of them, whether it's Daniel, it's Revelation, we're talking about the same entity. And when we say Greece, of course, when you think of Greece, of course, what comes to your mind? Alexander the Great has to come to your mind. I mean, he is the epitome of what it means to be a Greek, a young man at the age of 18, 19 years old that quite literally took over the known world of its time. So it's about Alexander the Great. It's about the Greek Empire. So the Babylonian Empire gets to its height. It wanes away. The Medo-Persian Empire comes on the scene. It gets to its height. It wanes away. And then finally, the Grecian Empire, the Greek Empire, comes to power. And this is the height of its power at Alexander the Great. And what winds up happening is, of course, Alexander the Great, at a very young age, takes over the world. And winds up, whether he dies of natural causes or he's poisoned, he dies very young, he dies in Babylon, and his kingdom, this global kingdom that was bigger than the size of Babylon, bigger than the size of Medo-Persia, winds up being divided up between four separate generals. I'll get into the names and the rest of that a little bit later. But these four generals who split up Alexander the Great's kingdom actually wind up going to war against each other. I think they're called the Didatic, if I'm saying it right, the Didache, the Didatic wars. They wind up fighting against each other. They all are battling for power over everything. They want the power. So it winds up in these battles, in these wars that go on, that two major powers come out of this war, or two of the descendants of the four generals over time wind up coming to power. And they are the Ptolemaic Empire, which is in Egypt, runs certainly all of Egypt, parts of Africa, all the way up to the Middle East area. And then there is the Seleucid Empire. They're still Greeks. They're still the descendants of from Alexander, but much time has gone on, war has gone on, and now these two opposing groups have sort of, taken over everything. And of course, as men are, or as men do, or nations do, they're fighting each other as well. And so the Seleucid Empire attacks the Ptolemaic Empire to try to take it over. In their actions attempting to take over the Ptolemaic Empire, to wipe them out, Jerusalem is part of the Seleucid Empire. Actually, it's fought over. It's part of the Ptolemaic Empire. It's part of the Seleucid Empire. But the Seleucids wind up, and here's a word that we probably are all familiar with. The Seleucid Empire, this Greek empire, puts out a mandate. A mandate. You must do this, or in this particular case, this type of mandate is you will die. And the mandate is quite simply, and again, this is just the general kind of idea, no more Torah. For the Jews, for all of what is Israel of its day, no more Torah, no more God stuff. No more single God of the house of Israel. No more circumcision. What the Seleucid Empire wanted was a Grecian empire everywhere it ruled. That everybody within its empire acted like Greeks do, which meant, of course, that they worship multiple gods. They did not circumcise, and they certainly did not give their allegiance to one single God. Of course, that being the God of Israel. So there is, and what's crazy about this is when you read the book of Maccabees, there were many, many Jews who went along with the mandate, who went along with what the Seleucid Empire said to do. And of course, the guy who is in charge of the Seleucid Empire is a man named Antiochus Epiphanes. And I think he's like the fourth or the fifth in a line of people that are called Antiochus, his father and so forth, and grandfather. And so, he's come down through history. But he's the one that puts this mandate on the people of Israel, on the Jews. No more Torah, no more priesthood, no more temple stuff. All that stuff's got to go. No more circumcision. And as I said, many, many Jews, to get along, to be able to go to work, to be able to live, they went along with whatever that mandate happened to be. Of course, now it's not a mandate in the sense that we're thinking of today, because this mandate included death, and it included mayhem, and it included torture, burning of Torahs. And of course, you can see the little picture there that I've got on the screen. You guys can see that. This burning of the scripture, the burning of the Torah, because they wanted nothing, no semblance, no piece or part of what the Jews had as far as worship to be in Jewish life. They wanted to Hellenize, I guess is really the word. They wanted to Hellenize the Jewish people. And they take over Jerusalem. They're doing it for like 6 months. They're doing some horrific things, between killing people, burning scrolls. I mean, just some horrific, horrible things. What they did to children. I mean, when you read the story, it's disgusting. It's basically Nazi Germany without a swastika and without the yellow star. But it's Nazi Germany of its day. That's kind of what's going on in Jerusalem, in the land of Israel. All right, so again, this is Cliff Notes version, but it lines up that about 6 months in to the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus Epiphanes, who has taken over Jerusalem. Now, first he ransacked it, and then he went back, and then he took it over. So now there's an occupying force that is doing everything it can to force this mandate upon the people. Again, many are complying. There are those that are not complying, that are fighting it all the way. But there is a proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. Well, the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, or a step too far, if you can see the notes that are in front of you, a step too far is when Antiochus and the soldiers and the people that he put in charge, because he wasn't actually there, but the people that he winds up putting in charge, they take it to a whole new level when they wind up not just stopping the temple worship, not just, they were killing priests, they were killing people, they were burning people, doing all these horrible things, but then they went to the actual physical temple, and a huge physical orgy was had, a sexual orgy was had in front of, on the temple grounds, in front of the temple, as worship to their gods, which was kind of the norm for the worship for the pagan gods, for the gods of Greece, for the pantheon of their gods. And they wind up slaughtering a pig on the altar of incense. Now, listen, if at this point we all should be aware of what a pig or a swine would be to the people of Judah. It is an unclean animal. It's not food. It's an unclean animal. Well, that gets slaughtered on the very altar of incense. And you can see there's a little picture there. It's just a sort of an artist's rendering. And of course, you've got, the Greek guards there, and you can see the swine that is put on the actual altar of incense. But they went even a step further. I mean, the orgy is horrible. The offering of a swine on the altar of incense is horrible. Then they wind up putting up a statue of Zeus in the actual Holy of Holies. That's it. That does it. I mean, with all the death and mayhem and everything that's gone on for almost 6 months now, this is the thing that just put people over the top. And at the same time, they are trying to go throughout the land of Israel, forcing people to be Hellenized, to give up their Jewish ways, to give up their Torahs, to stop reading, to stop circumcising, to stop doing all the things that they were doing. This action that they take of doing these things outside, inside, in the Holy of Holies, these actions they take are considered a desecration. And not just a desecration, but they cause the temple to be desolate. No more sacrifices go on. They stop all the daily sacrifices. There's no morning oblation. There's no evening oblation. The priesthood is disbanded, if not, many of them killed. All the priests are wiped out. They're scattered. They're running. All of that is stopped. And this event goes on, but this event turns. It turns. This is that one step too far, and from this point on, a revolt occurs, and understandably, a revolt occurs. They are absolutely against this Hellenization mandate, and a 3-year revolt begins. Now, Jerusalem is already a city under siege, under the thumb of the Greeks. But a 3-year revolt is started by a man named Maccabees. He's a Levite, and his sons. And it's his son, Judah Maccabees, that sort of gets top billing in all of this, because he's going to wind up becoming sort of the hero of the story, the leader of the resistance, if you would. And so they start a campaign after these events to try to win back Israel. They're not going to comply. They're not going to do what it is that the government's telling them to do. They're not going to give up their Torahs. They're going to fight. They're either going to win. Either God is going to give them victory, or they're going to die trying, because the temple was just it was just too far. The house of God has been desecrated, and the house of God, the desecration, this abomination, has made the house of God desolate. And it winds up, by the time that they do finally take over Jerusalem again, it's overgrown with weeds, and it's just in such disrepair. The house became desolate. This is where we get the term abomination of desolation. This is the first time it happens. And this, of course, is a term that we read about in the book of Daniel. So eventually, 3 years later, so it's really 3.5 years since this stuff started. But 3 years later, after, the ups and downs of war, they win battles, they lose battles, they're fighting, the army of the Seleucids. The army of the Seleucids have elephants and soldiers, and just, throwing things at these Jews that they've never seen before. And yet, really kind of in like a David and Goliath type of story, they win very, very many battles, to the point that eventually they do wind up kicking the Greeks out of Jerusalem. They do eventually wind up liberating the city of Jerusalem. And in the liberation of the city of Jerusalem, part of the liberation, of course, was to rededicate the temple. Thus the term Hanukkah, because that's what Hanukkah actually means, to dedicate. And so they dedicated the temple. Now, I want to, again, I'm not giving you any detail here. I'm just giving you the Cliff Notes version. Again, I encourage you to go and read this stuff. Check it out for yourself. However, I do want you to see this. All of this story was prophesied to Daniel, it was given to Daniel. Daniel prophesies it. And here is just Daniel chapter 8. I'm going to read through some of it. Of course, the yellow, remember, is me, sort of giving you the highlights so that you can see, as you read this story in Daniel, this is what he's talking about. These are the events that he is referring to, the events that we now today, past these events, now look back and would call Hanukkah. Daniel chapter 8 and verses 8 through 11 say the following. And the male goat became very great. Now, this is a story of the goat and the ram. If you read chapter 8, and the goat and the ram are button heads, the ram is Medo-Persia, and the goat is Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great takes over Medo-Persia. That's history, already established, already done. So we're sort of coming in the middle of the story here, but we're learning about what happens with Greece. And the male goat became very great. Alexander, which, is kind of neat, because he winds up being called Alexander the Great, and it tells us the male goat became very great, the one prominent horn on the male goat. But when he was strong, the large horn was broken. Alexander dies. He dies at a very, very young age in Babylon. And in the place of it, and I put there in yellow, 4 generals, but look at what Daniel actually says. This is way before Alexander came. He says 4 conspicuous ones came up toward the 4 winds of the heavens. In other words, they split up Alexander's kingdom, which is what history tells us they actually did. 4 generals come to power. They split up the Grecian Empire, and then they wind up fighting against each other. But we'll get there. Verse 9 says, and from one of them, that is one of the 4, the Seleucids. Now, I didn't explain who the 4 generals were. I'll tell you that in just a second. But one of them was a general named Seleucus. the people that come from him, or the empire he builds from what Alexander left over, was called the Seleucid Empire. Well, and from one of them, the Seleucids, came a little horn, not like the four major horns, not like the big Alexander horn. He's much, much smaller. That person is Antiochus Epiphanes, the guy who does all of this crazy Nazi stuff to the Jews in that day, 164, 162 to 161 to 162 to 164 BC. And from one of them, verse 9 again, and from one of them, the Seleucids, came a little horn. Antiochus Epiphanes is his name. Again, he's not the first Antiochus. He's got like his father, his grandfather. So this has been going on for a while. Which became exceedingly great towards the south and towards the east and towards the splendid land. The splendid land, of course, means Jerusalem. It means Israel. So he's fighting against the Ptolemaic Empire down in Egypt. And of course, who's in between his empire and the Ptolemaic Empire? Jerusalem is. So he's got to go through Jerusalem. Verse 10 says, and it became great up to the host of heaven, and it caused some of the host of the stars to fall to the earth. That's a poetic, sort of prophetic way of saying he killed Jews. He killed the Jews. He made mandates. He told them they had to do things. They had to become Greek. They had to become Hellenistic. No more Torah. That's what this is speaking about. He killed the stars that fell to earth. That's just a poetic way of saying he killed the saints. He killed the Jews of that day. Again, don't forget, many of the Jews went along with it. They kind of went with the mandate. It says, and trampled them down. Verse 11, it even exalted itself as high as the Prince of Hosts. How does he do that? The Prince of Hosts, of course, is Yah, is his temple. Well, how does he exalt himself above the Prince of eternity, of heaven? An orgy. He does it with, all slaughtering a pig. He does it with putting an idol in there, a statue of a Greek god. All of that is exalting himself, or as it says here, putting himself as high as the Prince of Hosts. It says, and it took that which is continual away from him. That which is continual, it means the morning and evening oblation, all the sacrifices. Remember, you can't go to the temple, you can't begin to bring sacrifice if there's no morning oblation. After the morning oblation, then all the sacrifices throughout the day can be done and people can come and commune with Father. And then there's an evening oblation to sort of close out the day. Well, when it says that he stopped the thing that was continual, it means he stopped the sacrifices, which is exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes does. It took away the continual away from him, the daily sacrifices, and threw down the foundation of his set apart place. That's the temple. Well, how does he destroy the foundation of the temple? An orgy, a pig, a statue. That's how it's done. The foundation of the temple is crumbled. Not that the temple falls, but the foundation of it is crumpled. There is no more priesthood that's active in it. The thing is shut down, and it becomes just an overgrown, place of weeds, 3.5 years later, when Judas Maccabees winds up liberating it. Verse 13 says, then I heard a certain set apart one speaking, and another set apart one. We're talking about angels here, as the book of Daniel is telling us this story. And one said to that certain one who was speaking, to when is the vision concerning that which is continual? He's saying, how long is it going to be without a morning oblation and an evening oblation? How long is this desecration, this abomination that has made Yah's temple desolate? How long is that going to go for? Concerning that which is continual, and the transgression that lays waste. Now it says lays waste here, but it refers to this later on as abomination of desolation. Lays waste is another way of saying desolation. It's sometimes called a transgression of desolation or an abomination of desolation. They mean the same thing. It depends on what version you're looking at. But here it's saying the transgression that lays waste, or the abomination of desolation. This is the first appearance of the abomination of desolation. We need to notice this. We need to understand this. If we're going to understand all the other stuff that's going to come prophecy stuff today, all the stuff that we hear out there, most do not understand what I'm trying to explain to you right now, but another day. So it says, and the transgression that lays waste, the abomination of desolation, to make both the set apart place, the temple, and the host, the people, to be trampled underfoot. So he's asking, how long is all of this going to happen? And he gives them a number, a certain amount of years. It's 3.5 years that all of this stuff winds up going on. This abomination of desolation, the trampling of the temple, no more sacrifices, and the people just dying right and left. And this battle, this war that is waged against these Gentile foreigners who have come in trying to Hellenize the Jewish people and move them away from obedience to the Torah and the worship of the temple. Now, Daniel doesn't stop there. So you understand what's actually being said here. Here is the next verse, or actually I skipped some verses just for time's sake, but you guys can read the whole chapter 8 of Daniel. And now that you know a little bit of the history, Daniel 8 is going to make a lot more sense to you as you read it. But here's verses 20 through 23. And listen to what Daniel continued, because now he's going to explain what all of this is about. He says, the angel says to him, the ram which you saw having 2 horns are the sovereigns of Media and Persia. Okay, well, we get that. That's the historical timeline. Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece. Greece fights with Medo-Persia. Alexander the Great wins. Here it is. The ram which you saw having 2 horns are the sovereigns of Medo-Persia, or Media and Persia, and the male goat is the sovereign of Greece. Guys, it doesn't get more explicit than this. This is not about, something that's off in the future. This is not about a 7-year thing. This is not about a tribulation in the future. It's not about a 3.5-year thing. This is about history from where you and I stand. And the male goat is the sovereign of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first sovereign. Alexander the Great, the first one, the guy who almost takes over the world, or does take over the world. Verse 22, and that it was broken, Alexander dies, and 4 stood up in its place. And here's the actual names, if you would, of the 4 generals, just so to throw out some information to you. You guys can look this up yourselves if you want. But here it is, Antigonus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Again, they have a war in between themselves for total control of the land, and it winds up that Ptolemy and Seleucus come out on top, but even Ptolemy and Seleucus wind up going at each other later on down in history. So we're talking about history here. One more time, verse 22, and that it was broken, and 4 stood up in its place, Antigonus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus, are 4 rulerships arising out of that nation, out of the Greek nation, but not in its power. They never own everything that Alexander the Great owned. Verse 23, and in the latter time of their rule, that is, during the time of the Seleucids, in the latter time of their rule, when the transgressions have filled up their measure. I think it means the transgressions of the people of God, but it could also mean the transgressions of the Greeks. I'm not sure, but either way, the meaning, it still sort of pans out. And when the transgressions have filled up their measure, a sovereign of fierce of face and skilled at intrigues shall stand up. That is the little horn called Antiochus Epiphanes from the Seleucid Empire. The guy who does everything that I just sort of, briefly, sort of Reader's Digest sort of skimmed over the story for you in just a few minutes. What we're reading in Daniel is the prophecy of what was going to happen from the time Daniel's writing this, 250, 200 years after Daniel, this thing actually happens. And amazingly, it happens exactly the way Daniel prophesies it. This is the fulfillment, the story of Antiochus and the abomination of desolation, the desecration of the temple, the killing of the Jews, the Maccabean War. All of it is the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 8. Okay, so I don't want to get too much into prophecy, but there it is right in front of you. You guys can run with this. We've talked about this before. We'll do it maybe another time. So with that then, why is this story important, or why does it appear in Daniel? Well, I mean, Hanukkah's got to be important because it appears in Daniel way before it ever occurred, way before it's ever a holiday, way before it's ever mentioned in John chapter 10 that it was winter and it was the time of dedication. It was prophesied in the book of Daniel. So it has value. It is important to the whole of the story. Why? Because, and just like everything else, there was already a destruction of the temple in Babylon, right? Jeremiah writes about it. Isaiah prophesies about it. Jeremiah writes the book of Lamentations. Ezekiel writes about the destruction of the temple, all the stuff that's going on. They're talking about the destruction of the first temple. But what we now know is Yeshua takes those prophecies, their personal witness, their personal testimony of that historical event, and he takes that historical event and he applies it, or Yeshua applies it and says, all of that is actually about, or a description of, what's going to happen in the future from Yeshua's time, in the future for the destruction of Jerusalem. Even though it already happened in history, Yah is using their words, their description, their laments, their crying, the scripture, and he's going to use all of their words to give us an insight, a window into what Yah would say about the actual destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That's the way prophecy works. It occurs, it's a real historical event, but it has an attachment to something bigger that's coming. Well, here it is. That's why this is so important. That's why what Greece does is so important, because something like it was going to happen again. So the first time it happens gives us a physical witness, a description of how horrible and terrible and yada, yada, yada it is, only to give us an insight into how horrible and terrible something else is going to happen that is going to be similar, not exact, but similar enough that you can get information from the first time that it's talked about. And here is the something else, because the master talks about this. Guys, the most important event in all of biblical history, outside, of course, the resurrection, is the final destruction of Jerusalem. Here's Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15. Listen to what Yeshua says, because he's talking about the Hanukkah story. Or what eventually becomes the Hanukkah story, but the Maccabean War, all the events of what Greece does. It says, so when you see the abomination that lays waste, or the transgression that lays waste, the way we read it in Daniel, spoken of by Daniel. So he's pointing to a historical event. He's saying, listen to that historical event, study that historical event, because something like it is about to happen. And that's why he says, he who reads, I put it in red there so you guys can see it. That's why he says, he who reads, let him understand. He's telling us, listen, you got to understand, yeah, this is a historical event that I'm talking about, but this is going to happen again, a little bit differently on a bigger scale, but you'll at least have a frame of reference if you understand what Daniel said before. The beast is going to do what it did before, except it's going to do it on a much bigger scale. This time it's not going to be Greece, it's going to be Rome. So here it is, one more time, verse 24, verse 15. So when you see the abomination that lays waste, the transgression that lays waste, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, set up in the set apart place, that's the temple. He who reads, let him understand. So what is he actually, what is the abomination of desolation really about? It is that when the temple is overrun by the Gentiles, because that's what happened the first time. It was overrun by Antiochus and his military. It was laid waste. Yeshua is telling them the temple, listen, he who has an ear, listen, the temple is going to be overrun again. It's going to happen again. Very similar to the way it happened the first time, except things are going to be different this time. So the temple will be overrun by Gentiles. Verse 16, listen to what he says. Then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. In other words, What's not going to happen this time is there's not going to be a guy called Maccabees that's going to rise up. There's not going to be a guy called Judah Maccabees who's going to rise up. There's not going to be a rebellion against it this time. This time, what Yah is telling them to do, unlike what happened the first time, Yah is telling those that are his people, get out. Get out. Run. Get out, go to the mountains, pray your flight's not in winter, pray you're not pregnant, all the stuff that you continue to read in Matthew 24. And just so you understand the context of what all of these that he's saying in Matthew 24, here's Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. It says, and again going out, Yeshua went away from the set-apart place, the temple, and his taught ones, his disciples, came near to the point to point out to him the buildings of the temple of the set-apart place. And Yeshua, so they're pointing out the temple, and Yeshua said to them, do you not see all these? Truly I say to you, not one stone shall be left upon another, which shall not be thrown down. That's the context of all of Matthew 24. That's what all of Matthew 24 is about, the destruction of Jerusalem. And so when you read verse 15, he's telling us, listen, the example is Daniel. When you see the same things happening, when you see a Gentile army surrounding you, get out. What happened in Daniel's day, or what Daniel prophesied, what happened in the days of the Maccabees is happening again, except this time there is no Judah Maccabees and there is no army that's going to come against them and have victory and then regain the temple and make everything good and neat. So that's the context, if you would, or the differences. There's similarities, but Yeshua is also telling us there's differences in what is about to come. Now, there's something else I want to mention here. I don't want to go into it in great detail, but I want to mention it because it is important. Maybe we can do another study on this another time. But once the Maccabees or Judah Maccabees gets rid of the Greeks in 164, and he gets rid of them and rededicates the temple, what winds up happening is they install a priesthood that is not the Aaronic priesthood. They're not the descendants of Aaron. They're a mixture of different peoples. They're a mixture of different people groups from outside, from Persia. They're the Hasmoneans. It's not what Moses said to do as far as the leadership of the temple. Now, there's still Levites there. There's still good, godly people. Later on, we read that by the time Yeshua comes, Zechariah, who's a Levite and part of the house of Abijah, is a good and godly man. But the people who are in charge of it, they're not. And what winds up happening after this is the formation of the Pharisees, this whole other group of political and social and religious leaders. This all begins to spawn out of this. So what winds up happening is the people, even though they liberated Jerusalem, they took a turn to the left. I mean, hard left. They took a turn, and what they were doing, or what they instituted in the temple system and in the teaching, winds up going so way out of the way, which is why this event will occur again. This is why Yeshua is telling us this event will occur again, because what they were doing was wrong and it was bad. They were the serpents, if you would, that we've been talking about on our weekend services. So, but I don't want to get too much into that. There's a lot of history we can get into, but I just don't have time for that. I'm running out of time already. Got so much to share with you. But I want you to be aware of that the people who are in charge of the temple are not the sons of Aaron. It's a different group of people. So here we go. But is there historical importance to Hanukkah, though? Yes. There's tremendous prophetic importance. Without understanding that, you'll not understand what Yeshua is talking about in Matthew 24. If you don't understand the importance of the destruction of Jerusalem, it's all going to go right over your head, and it does for most of us, and it did for most of us for most of our time in Yah. But now our eyes are starting to be open. It's all about what happens at 70 AD. That's what the crux of everything, the climax of everything is then. Yeshua says, upon this generation, all the blood from Abel to Zechariah will fall on this generation. He's talking about that generation of those people that were there, the destruction of Jerusalem. But Hanukkah's important, and it gets mentioned even in other places within our Berit Hadashah, within the New Testament writings. The writer of Hebrews says the following in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 32. It says, and of course, this is the Hall of Faith chapter, right? This is, and Abraham had faith and he did this, and Sarah had faith and he did this, and Isaac had faith. It's just all these people, it says, and they went to their grave not receiving the promise, but they went to their grave believing the promise of a kingdom to come. Well, when it gets down finally to verse 32, it's still going through this Hall of Faith, all of these great people of faith. And in verse 32, it says, and what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to relate of Gideon and Barak and Shimon and Yiptah and David and Samuel and the prophets who through belief, faith, overcame kings, worked righteousness, obtained the promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong. And here's where it becomes really important to us, because now we're talking about Hanukkah here. We're really talking about the Maccabean War. Out of weakness were made strong, became mighty in battle, and put foreign armies to flight. This is a reference to the book of Maccabees. This is a reference to the historical events that Daniel prophesies about in Daniel chapter 8 that's lived out by the people that were alive at between 160 and 164 AD during the Maccabean War, during the takeover and the mandates coming from the Grecian Empire of Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn. So they put armies to flight. Who did it? Judah Maccabees did it. So this is listing great feats of faith. Listen, for Judah to win against the Grecian army was a great act of faith. It really, really was. It was a major, major event in Bible history. And so it is relayed here. So even in the book of Hebrews, we have at least a glancing reference, because if you're not aware of what he's talking about, you can read right over it and not understand what's being said. But at least we have a glancing reference to this story. All right, so all of this I'm telling you is just sort of background. Some of it you know, some of it you may have heard before. But here's the questions. And so what does all of this mean? Is the story of Hanukkah important? And I say Hanukkah, but what I really mean is the story of the desolation of the temple, the abomination that made it desolate, all the stuff that this foreign army does. Is that important? Yes, it is vitally important. Without that understanding, you will not understand Matthew 24. You will not understand the book of Revelation. You will not understand prophecy. You will not understand Ezekiel. You will not understand Jeremiah. None of those books will be open to you. They will be sealed forever until we get that into our spiritual understanding. So is it important? It is vitally important. Did Yeshua refer to the historical events of Hanukkah, again, the whole Maccabean War, as a warning of what is to come? Yes, absolutely he did. When you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel, except this time, not like last time, he says, get out. Don't fight. Don't raise up a resistance. Get out. What was coming, the temple destruction, exactly like the Greek abomination? No, it was similar to it. That is the pattern of it, but it's not exactly like it, but it's close enough that they would have understood when Yeshua said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, he that has an ear, let him hear. It was close enough that they would see the pattern, except this time it wasn't Greece coming in just to try to Hellenize the people. It was Rome coming in to destroy, to destroy the people and destroy the temple. Similar and yet different. It would be worse. Another question. Should we understand Hanukkah and the temple destruction, meaning 70 AD? Yes, because we don't is why so many misunderstand prophecy or come up with all sorts of end time stuff today about what's going on today in Iran and in Israel and in Syria, and we're looking for a Mahdi or this or that, and it's got nothing to do with any of that. It's about this story. Not saying that crazy stuff isn't going on. Crazy stuff is going on all over the place. Our whole world is upside down. The enemy is trying to build a one world empire. All of that is happening, and it's true. I absolutely. But all of this that we're reading about is about what happened. It's about what has been historical. So yeah, it's important. Yes, they are the pattern of the biggest event in biblical history. Again, outside of the resurrection, put that aside, save the resurrection. But outside of that, the destruction of Jerusalem is the biggest event in all of biblical history because it is the judgment of the harlot. It's the judgment of the city, and it is the judgment of Jerusalem. Now, here's the real question, and again, I'm just going to pose it right now. We'll answer it in a little bit, but so if all of this is so important, if all of this is so relevant, and it is, did Yeshua celebrate Hanukkah? Good question. We'll see where we get to. So, Hanukkah. Let's take a look at that just for a second. Again, this is not an exhaustive study. I don't have time to do an exhaustive study, but here's just some highlights for everybody. So we think of Hanukkah. I'm talking more about some of the modern stuff, but also some of the ancient stuff. So listen to this. When you think about Hanukkah, when Yeshua, when we're talking about in John chapter 10, he's in Jerusalem. It says at the time of winter, at least according to the Hebrew account, it's at the time of winter. Some of the other accounts, it says it's at the time of dedication. First of all, there was no such thing as a Hanukkah. That is something that happened so much later on in history. No such thing as a 9-branch candlestick. There was a menorah, but no such thing as a Hanukkah, nor was there any such thing as candle lighting the way that it's done today. All of that is postmodern stuff that happened way down in history. So Yeshua, even if he was in Jerusalem, I'm just assuming, I'm just putting it out there as a possibility. I'm not saying that this is what it is, but even if he was there, none of that stuff was going on. As a matter of fact, where the whole festival of lights comes on, where the whole lighting of actually winds up being taken from the Saturnalia, which also has in its celebration, as it still does today. We don't call it Saturnalia today, we call it Christmas today, again in the time of winter. Well, the descendants of these people, the people that claim to be the descendants of these people as history went on, they adopted the festival of lights of the cultures around them, of the Roman culture, the Saturnalia, and it became just another one of like the Gentiles, a festival of lights, worthy of another study for another day. We just don't have time to go through that. But was that there when Yeshua was there? Absolutely not. Had nothing to do with it. Judah, the Maccabees, they institute a second Sukkot. So when they cleanse the temple, they institute a second Sukkot, another festival. Now, for anybody who has been under our ministry for a while, you've heard me quote Deuteronomy 4 a gazillion times. We are not to add to Yah's word, and we are not to take away from Yah's word. So what is it if we add a brand new feast day that is not what Yah asks for? Is that of God? Is that what we should be doing? Well, that is exactly what the Maccabean new priesthood wound up doing, instituting a second Sukkot, adding to what Moses had already said. And it winds up, and I'm going to give you a down in the description of this video. You can certainly download the notes. You can copy them. But and also at the bottom of this page, there will be a website that you can go to. It's thehaaretz.com. And there's a neat little article there. It's written by Jews, and it'll give you a lot of this information. It's a very, very brief article, but it's in a Jewish magazine that goes through some of this history. When you read it, you're like, oh my goodness, wait, this isn't true, and this isn't true, and this isn't true, and this isn't true, and this is where they got it. And it's really eye-opening, so I invite you, definitely go to the description box, and the link will be there for you. You can check it out, go read it on your own, and there's plenty of other sources you can go to get all this information as well. They wind up actually sort of connecting and validating this second Sukkot with Jeremiah somehow. That somehow Jeremiah prophesied of a fire or something, and that became the light that it's guys, it's out there. It's out there. There is no scripture about it. It's not what any prophet ever said. But it's part of the story as it winds up unfolding, or part of the history as it winds up unfolding. There is no oil that lasted 8 days. That is a make-believe story. It is made up. It is not true, nor was it part of anything that was thought about in the first century or even at the time of the Maccabees. Again, this is something that came about so long after. And again, it was to keep up with the Festival of Lights amongst the Gentiles that were all around them, because what happens in this miracle of 8 days, or the miracles of the oil and the lighting and the oil lasts for 8 days, not only is it just all made up, but then what gets attached to that is then the giving of gifts on each and every day, the spinning of the dreidel. All of that stuff was added much, much later and has nothing to do with the historical event, nor would it have anything to do even in the first century, when it talks about in John chapter 10, at least from the scriptures we're looking at so far, that it was the Feast of Dedication. There is no such thing as a Hanukkah bush. I know there's some that do it, some that don't. Again, this is another influence from the Saturnalia, or from Christmas today, that has seeped itself into Pharisaic Judaism of today. And now you got this Hanukkah bush, like a Christmas tree that's just part of the whole celebration. And here's the kicker. Josephus, the guy at 70 AD who writes about the destruction of Jerusalem, a Jew himself who was part of the rebellion, in his own testimony says, I have never heard nor celebrated anything called the Festival of Lights. We're talking about 70 AD. He never did it. And if he never did it, boy, there's that link. You can check out the link. It's right there on the bottom of the page that you're looking at. But also, if you go to the description part of today's broadcast, look down there and you'll get the link. Just check out. It's a short article. It's very, very short, but it's an eye opener when you start to read it. So the celebration as it's being done today, right now, today, tonight's the night of Hanukkah, has no historical connection to any of the stuff that we just said. It is stuff that has evolved and been made up and has been influenced by the Gentiles, by Saturnalia, by Rome, by all of these other things. So, when we think of the Feast of Dedication, would Yeshua be doing any of that? Absolutely not. None of that has anything to do with him. This is stuff that was made up during the diaspora, during the scattering. And again, it's worthy of so much more study than I have time to give to it tonight, because I got so much I want to share with you. Okay, so that's the celebration today. Now, if you think about it, the concept of celebrating the dedication as was done by the Maccabees is actually from what Yeshua tells us, what the Master tells us is a memorial or a longing for something that Yah judged as a harlot, that he said not one stone would be left upon it. So, just think that out for a second. Would there be a memorial that Yah would want us to do that is the memorial of something that he explicitly says is going to be destroyed? Here's Matthew chapter 23 and verse 37. These are Yeshua's words. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who were sent to her. How often I wish to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, but you would not. So what's going to happen? See, your house, the temple, will be left to you desolate. Guys, those are the master's words. This is what the master's saying about Jerusalem, about the temple. Revelation 18:2. Don't forget, this is also about the temple. And these are also Yeshua's words, except this is the glorified Yeshua. This is coming from Yah out of heaven to John in the Revelation. And listen to what's said about Jerusalem. This is the Jerusalem Yeshua was in. This is the temple Yeshua was in from the time of the Maccabees on. It says, and he cried with a mighty voice saying, Babel the Great, meaning Jerusalem. Babel is not America. It's not the EU. It's not the UN. It is Jerusalem. Babel the Great, Jerusalem is fallen, and has become, listen to the description of how Yah saw Jerusalem and the temple, a dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, and a haunt for every unclean and hated bird. Oh my goodness. Do you realize the impact of those statements of what the master is saying about Jerusalem? Because all the nations have drunk of the wine of her wrath, of her whoring, and the sovereigns of the earth have committed whoring with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the power of her riotous living. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, to Yah's people who are in Jerusalem, come out of her, my people. He's talking about the Netzarim. He's talking about the people of the way. He's talking about what Matthew 24 says. When you see the abomination that Daniel spoke about, let he that has an ear. There's not going to be a Judah Maccabees. There's not going to be a revolt. You need to get out. This is it. This is the final thing. This is the climax of all history. Jerusalem is coming down. The temple is coming down and will not be rebuilt or will not be reestablished until Messiah comes. Come out of her, my people, the Netzarim, the people of the way, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plague. So if you don't follow what the master says, if you listen to, and here's a little, I'm going to throw a little bone out there. Maybe you guys can run with it. If you listen to the scorpions and their scorpion bite, and you stay in Jerusalem the whole 5 months from Passover all the way to, at the end of Passover, all the way to the time that the temple is destroyed, when the Romans are gathering around you and you're listening to the people, the vipers, the scorpions inside of Jerusalem that are telling you, we got the temple, nothing's going to happen. Yah is for us. He's going to raise up another Judah Maccabees. We're going to fight. We're going to beat these Romans. If you listen to them those whole 5 months, believe me, you're going to want to die, and you're not going to be able to die. You're going to be sitting in Jerusalem asking for the rocks to fall on us, to kill us before these Romans get in here, because you know what's going to happen when the Romans finally breach that gate, and you won't figure it out for 5 months, because that's about how long it took before the people stopped listening or realized the people who were telling them all this garbage were nothing but scorpions, and the venom was in their tails, and they caused poison amongst the people, and the people writhed in pain, in sickness, and in hunger, and cannibalism, and all sorts of horrific things going on in Jerusalem, waiting for the final fall, when finally they would either be taken away and raped and killed and pillaged, or put into slavery, or put into the Colosseums. That's what they had to look forward to. So I'm putting out just a spiritual bone out there. You guys can run with that if you want. We'll talk about that another day. But I want to show you here, if this is what's happening to Jerusalem, if this is what's coming, why would there be a celebration about it? Why would the master be part of an extra biblical, outside of the Torah celebration that has, at least the way it is done today, no basis in fact or really in practice to the scripture. So what's going on? What's going on with this thing? The text, at least the way we have it in some of our modern versions, it says it was the Feast of Dedication. But I also want you to be sensitive that it also says, and we're just talking about the Gospel of John here. If you've been following us on our weekend messages, remember the Gospel of John, as we read through the order of the Gospel, it says Sukkot comes after Passover. Anybody who actually does the holidays, and you should, you know that Sukkot does not come after Passover. Here's John chapter 5, verse 1. It says, and after this, after the Passover of John chapter 2 and verse 3, after he meets the woman at the well, there was a festival of the Yehudim. Well, what festival comes after Passover? Shavuot. And Yeshua went up to Jerusalem, as he should, obeying Moses, obeying what he said, what he told Moses to do. Messiah is also obeying as a son of Adam. Then it goes to chapter 6, verse 1. This is right after Shavuot. But look at what it says. And after this, after Shavuot, the feast that Yeshua went up to, Yeshua went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. That is the lake of Kinnereth or Gennesaret. And the Pesach, the Passover, was near. That's not what comes after Shavuot. Now, what I think, again, I think a scribe kind of put that in at some point. Listen, there are additions, there are errors, there's all sorts of issues in a lot of the text. That's why we need to have multiple texts. But if there is a festival that is being referred to here, it's not Passover. What festival can be going on where you could still be way up north in Galilee? Because if it was the feast of the Passover, Yeshua should be on his way, as it is according to Moses, as all men should be, back to Jerusalem. But he's not. He stays in Galilee, because that's what chapter 7, verse 1 says. He's still in Galilee even after that. So what festival could it have been? Probably we're talking about trumpets, and we're talking about atonement, because those are also festivals, but those are festivals you do not have to go to Jerusalem for. But you wouldn't know this unless you actually practice the scripture. John chapter 7, the next chapter then says, and after this other festival, again, not Pesach, it's got to be trumpets or atonement. And after this, Yeshua was walking in Galilee, which is where he was in chapter 6. For he did not wish to walk in Judah, because the Yehudim, the Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, were seeking to kill him, ever since the thing with John the Baptist. And the festival of the Jews was near. What festival? Well, it tells us. What's the next one? You got Passover, you got Sukkot. What's the next one? The festival of, you got Passover, then Shavuot. Now the festival of Sukkot, or Tabernacles. So are there issues that we can, as we read, we're like, wait a minute, that don't make sense? Yes, absolutely. And this isn't the only place. There's a lot of other places. I just don't have time to go through it all with you guys. All sorts of different places where there are issues where you really need to have multiple versions and have an understanding of Torah before you understand what's actually going on in the Gospels. But I only mention this as so what's going on here? Is there an error here? Is there a problem? Maybe not. Let's find out. So here's what I want to look at. I want to give you sort of a timeline. Let's go through now. I wanted to do this on a weekend message, but again, since it is the time of Hanukkah, I thought it more appropriate to kind of do this today. But let's go through just an order of events of the Gospel of John, so we get a continuity of what's going on, because it is a continuous story, one thing after the other. So chapter 6, we just talked about last week on our weekend message, the whole bread of life thing. Many leave him. I'm the bread of life, the manna, Yah gave the true bread, eat of my body, drink of my blood. Chapter 7 then goes on, and we just read chapter 7 is Tabernacles. Yeshua is at Jerusalem for Tabernacles. That's at the end of the seventh month. Remember, the seventh month begins trumpets, it begins atonement, and it ends with Sukkot. It ends with tabernacles. So chapter 7 is where Yeshua, he's at the water libation thing. He says, come to me, all you are thirsty. I'll give waters of river life, all that stuff. Chapter 7 about the tabernacles thing, that happens at the end of the seventh month. Chapter 8 is also the Feast of Tabernacles. Perhaps it occurs on the 8th day of Tabernacles, possibly, but it's during the season or during the Festival of Tabernacles, which is Sukkot, the continuation of Sukkot. That's chapter 8. That's the woman taken in adultery, I am the light of the world, all the rest of that. Chapter 9, and it's not just chapter 9, it's chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10 all occur after Tabernacles and actually cover October, what in our calendar. So if the end of September is the seventh month, chapter 8, 9, and 10 cover October, November, and December. They cover a 3-month period. We only get a couple of chapters of teaching of this, but they all happen in Jerusalem. None of this teaching happens outside of Jerusalem. Guys, think about this. Yeshua did not go down to Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication. He never left Jerusalem from the time he went there to Tabernacles. He didn't go there specifically for dedication, guys. He never left. Chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10 happen over a 3-month period from the 7th month or September all the way to December. The end of chapter 10, which is in that 3-month area, it's at the end, it's at what we would call December. At the end of chapter 10, he leaves. He leaves Jerusalem. Why? Because the Pharisees, the priests, the Hasmonean priests, wanted him dead. Why? Because for 3 months, he's been deriding them, beating them up, calling them vipers, saying all sorts of horrible, not horrible, but true, but nasty things to them. And these guys have had it. They want him dead. So what happens at the end of chapter 10? 3 months later, after seeing all the miracles and stuff and all the teachings, chapter 10 and verse 39. Therefore, they were seeking again to seize him, the Pharisees, the priest. But he went out of their hand and went once more to the other side of the Jordan, where they had no jurisdiction, to the place where John was immersing or baptizing at first, and there he stayed. So guys, when he goes down to Tabernacles in chapter 7, he never leaves Jerusalem until the end of chapter 10. He did not go there specifically for the Feast of Dedication. He was there teaching for over 3 months the people of God. And then chapter 11 of John. I know I'm giving away a little bit of what our weekend messages are about, but chapter 11 then tells us while he's outside of the legal bounds of the Pharisees, they can't touch him out there, that's when he receives word about Lazarus, that he died. And that is, of course, when he comes back to Judah, to where Bethany, to where Lazarus was. That's where he comes back. And then that leads us all the way up to the Passover, the final Passover. So even that, he spends a couple of months out there, out on the other side of the Jordan doing teaching. And then he comes back just before Passover, and which winds up to be the final Passover, the death and the resurrection. So now you've got at least an outline, hopefully a mental picture of what goes on from chapter 7, which is Tabernacles, all the way to chapter 10, which goes all the way to the winter. Now let's see what Yeshua actually said. I'm just going to give you a synopsis, if you would. We're not going to go over every verse because, again, we're doing this on the weekend messages. I'll go over it in much, much more detail. But take a listen to some of these. Here we go. Chapter 7, this is Tabernacles, Sukkot. Listen to what Yeshua says, or listen to what happens. It says, many from the crowd, when they heard the word, when they heard what Yeshua was teaching, with the miracles, when they heard what he said at the temple service, when they heard what he said, they said, truly, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Messiah. Now, they're kind of mixed up that they think the prophet and the Messiah are two different people. They are the same person. Two different offices, but the same person. But they're on the right track. They're saying, wait, this guy that's doing this, and we see all these marvelous and wonderful things he's doing, he's got to be the prophet. He's got to be the Messiah. But others said, they questioned, does the Messiah come out of Galilee? Look at the response of the Pharisees. You got to get this. They are so antagonistic. They are serpents, guys. Verse 47 says, the Pharisees therefore answered them, have you also been deceived? Have you also been led astray? Here's a question, and you got to understand how this is being said. He's looking, have any one of you other Pharisees believed in him? Listen, when they say that, that means if we find out any one of you guys are saying what the crowd of people are saying, we're coming after you. Has any one of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him? Verse 49, and look at what they say about the people who are looking and saying, wait a minute, you know what it is? The Pharisees are saying, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe your lying eyes. But this crowd, here's the Pharisees saying, but this crowd that does not know the Torah is cursed. They're saying because you think this man is Messiah, you're cursed and you don't know the Torah. So you got a dichotomy here. You got people that are looking and saying, yeah, maybe. But then you got these Pharisees and the priests and the scribes that are saying, no, that cannot be him. And you guys are cursed because you don't know the Torah. We know the Torah. Now you get into chapter 8, perhaps the 8th day or sometime after Tabernacles. Again, this dichotomy. Verse 43 says, why do you not know what I say? Because you are unable to hear my word. Listen to what Yeshua says to them, to the Pharisees. You are of your father, the devil. You think that went over well over those months that he's hanging out with them from Tabernacles all the way to December? You think they forgot about these words? You think they weren't pissed off to high heaven about these words that Yeshua just shot at them? You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you wish to do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he has not stood in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is the liar and the father of it. He's telling these guys, you're it, you're him. Your baby serpents, he's father serpent. Your children serpents, he's father serpent. You are of your father. Do you think that made them happy for 3 months as he's talking about all this stuff? No, it ticked them off to no end. It then goes on. Chapter 9 and verse 13. Now, this is the months after Tabernacles, the time in between Tabernacles, the 7th month, all the way up to the 10th month. So somewhere in that time frame after Tabernacles, look at what it says. It says in chapter 9 and verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the one who was once blind. So this is when Yeshua goes out and he finds the guy who was blind, and his disciples ask, was he blind, because he did something, some sort of sin? He was blind from birth. And Yeshua says, no, so that the glory of God will be done. So he heals the guy. He spits on the ground. He makes the clay, puts it on his eyes, goes tell him to wash. Wonderful miracle. Where does it happen? In the temple, because he's hanging out in the temple for 3 months after the time of Tabernacles. They brought to the Pharisees the one who was once blind. Verse 14, it says, and now it was the Sabbath when Yeshua made the clay and opened the eyes. So you notice the whole issue of the Sabbath thing. But verse 22, so he heals this guy. A wonderful, amazing sign. Somebody who was blind now sees. Look at what verse 22 says. It says, and his parents, who the Pharisees are questioning the parents, they're questioning him. And his parents said, because they were afraid of the Yehudim, of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. For the Yehudim had already agreed that if anyone confessed that Yeshua was indeed the Messiah, he would be put out of the congregation. You got to understand what put out of the congregation means. You have no source of food. You have no source of family, no source of community. You're as good as a beggar out for the Romans. You are lost if you get put out of the temple. This is the pressure that they were putting on people that were starting to begin to believe, seeing all of these wonderful things over a 3-month period at the temple. So you see this animosity between the two of them building up. This is why Yeshua's got to leave. This is why later on Thomas says, wait, we're going back to Judah in chapter 11 with Lazarus. We're going back to Judah. They wanted to kill you. He's like, all right, fine. Let's just all go and die together because of these words. That's why he's saying it. Chapter 9 and verse 39, it says, and Yeshua said, for judgment I have come into this world, that those not seeing, like this guy who was blind, but it doesn't just mean that he was physically blind. He had no idea who Yeshua was, no idea who Messiah was. So those not seeing might see, and those seeing might become blind, or at least those who think they see. The serpents. And look at what their response is. Again, the animosity of these 3 months. And those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind too? Yeshua said to them, if you were blind, if you truly were blind, you got no problem. You would have no sin, which means you know nothing. And now you can open up your eyes and see. But now you say you see. Therefore, your sin remains. You say you know, you say you understand, you say you have Torah, but you don't. You are actually blind. So again, just the animosity. Can you see the animosity building up week after week, month after month, 3 months of this antagonistic boom, 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 boom. They're smashing their heads together. And Yeshua's not letting up. He's not letting up. He's getting harder and harder and harder at them because there's something else going on they do not understand. Here is John chapter 10 and verse 8. So now we are into December. Now we're into just beginning or just really close to that 10th month, or what we would call on our Gentile calendar today, what we would call December, winter. And look at what John chapter 10 and verse 8 says. This is Messiah speaking. And again, we've had this so misinterpreted for so long. Yeshua says, all who came before me, meaning not Satan, he means the Pharisees, the Hasmoneans, the priests, the scribes, all you people who say that you see, but you're really blind. All who came before me are thieves and robbers. You think that on top of your father's the devil and you guys are just like, you don't think that they're just button heads. Meanwhile, there's other people are saying, is this the Messiah? Is this the prophet? That's just got to be ticking off the scribes and the Pharisees even more. Yeshua goes on to say, but the sheep did not hear him. People that really do want Yah, they're not going to listen to these guys. They're going to look right through these guys. Verse 10, listen, and again, this is so very, very misinterpreted today. It says, the thief does not come except to steal, kill, slaughter, and to destroy. Yeah, I guess in a kind of you can say that Satan, he does all the things. He's the father of all of them. But Yeshua is making this a direct reference to the priests, to the scribes, to the Pharisees. He's saying, you guys came to kill. You guys came to destroy. That's what you guys do. You're the serpents. I have come. So he's contrasting what you guys are doing to the people. I have come, and I put it in blue so that you see. We're going to go over this in more detail over on our weekend messages, but they did not understand what Messiah came to do. They had a perception. All the people had a perception of what Messiah should do, but it was wrong. It was wrong. There was a bigger issue than they could ever even imagine. And so the master says, excuse me, I have come that they might possess life and that they might possess it beyond measure. He's talking about eternal life. They're thinking of a Messiah that's going to do something very, very different. He's saying, no, you guys got it wrong. You do not understand why I'm here. Then verse 12, same chapter 10, Yeshua then goes on to explain this. He says, I am the good shepherd, the shepherd of Psalm 23, guys, the shepherd of Ezekiel 34. The good shepherd lays down his life for a sheep. He told it right there. This is what I've come to do. I've come to lay down my life for the sheep. I've come to give them eternal life. But the hireling, and by hireling he means Pharisee, priest, scribe, and not being a shepherd. They were not the shepherds. One who does not own the sheep sees the wolf coming. He's prophesying here. A danger is coming. Something's coming. Another Antiochus Epiphanes is coming. Another Hanukkah is coming. Another Abomination of Desolation is coming. And this time there's not going to be a Maccabees. This time as a matter of fact, this time what he says, they're going to see the wolf coming, Rome, and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches the sheep, Rome, and scatters them. He's speaking specifically about 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem. Now the hireling flees because he is a hireling and is not concerned about the sheep. Guys, there were those that were telling the people in Jerusalem that Passover, because that's when all this started with Rome, the temple's here for us. God's with us. Everything's going to work out fine. We're going to be protected. Doesn't matter if these Gentile nations, this is going to be like Jericho. We're going to beat them all. It's going to be just like Hanukkah. This is just like the Maccabees. We're going to win. And people listen to that stuff, except those that listened to Yeshua and they got out. And you know who else ran? Pharisees ran. Priests ran. Why? Because they were hirelings. How else do you think Pharisaic Judaism continued? All other aspects of Judaism, all other sects of Judaism died in 70 AD except Pharisaic Judaism. It continued. Why? Because they were hirelings and they got out. Even though they were telling the people, everything's good, everything's good, everything's good, they got out. They saw the Netzarim getting out. They saw the writing on the wall, so to speak. They also got out, and enough of them got out to start this mess all over again. And it's been going on all the way up till today. Here is John chapter 10 and verse 22. I am running out of time here. Let me quickly go through this. It says in John chapter 10, verse 22, and at that time, this is the verse that we opened up with today. Here it is. And at that time, the time of Hanukkah, or the Feast of Dedication, and at that time, it came to be in Jerusalem, and it was in winter. So that's how many of our versions, probably the version you got, reads, right? Don't forget what the Hebrew says doesn't speak about that. And at that time, the time of Hanukkah came to be in Jerusalem, and it was winter. So now it's 3 months later from the time of Tabernacles. Yeshua's been there the whole time, and it was winter. And Yeshua was walking in the set-apart place in the temple in the porch of Shlomo. Why? Because he's been there for 3 months healing people, preaching, teaching, and ripping apart the priests, the scribes, and the Pharisees. Verse 25 then says, so the Yehudim surrounded him, the Jews, these other people, because they see the miracles, they see the healings, they know the guy that was blind and he can see. You can't just totally throw this stuff out of your understanding. It's there. You got to be questioning. You may be hard of heart, but you got to be asking, are you the Messiah? And they say to him, they surrounded him and said to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, say to us plainly. Now, here's the thing. You got to get this. This wraps the whole thing up together, guys. What were they expecting of Messiah? Their concept of Messiah is a conquering king who's going to come. They know he fed 5,000. They know he fed 4,000. They heard the story he walked on water. They saw the miracles. They saw the healings. If that guy's got that kind of power and he really is Messiah, then he will fulfill what we expect him to fulfill. What they were looking for was another Judas Maccabees. They were looking for another Hanukkah. They were looking for someone to get rid of Rome, to come against Rome with all the might and power of God, and to deliver Jerusalem, to deliver Israel, and set Israel up as the rulership of the world. That is not what Messiah came for. He came to lay down his life for the sheep. He came to give life to those who were blind and now see. We'll talk more about this on another day. It needs to be developed. It needs to be really, really expanded on. But I'm just giving you really, really short info here because I am totally out of time. But their expectation was wrong. They're expecting at the time of winter, and maybe in the temple there's some sort of celebration, some sort of memorial, maybe they're doing it. That doesn't mean that's what Yeshua is there for, but that's what they're thinking. They're thinking if you're Messiah with all the power you've got, you can be another Judas Maccabees. You can lead us. And we know this is true because what winds up happening later on in history is Rabbi Akiva winds up anointing another guy as Messiah, saying that he is Messiah, and he raises an army to try to fight the Romans, and the Romans crush them. They wind up doing exactly what they were expecting Yeshua to do here. Their expectation was that this will be another Hanukkah, but Yeshua has expressly told us there will be no more Hanukkah. That's not happening. When you see what Daniel was speaking about with Greece, run, get out. Pray that your flight's not in winter, and a great tribulation starts from that time until I come. That's what Yeshua was talking about. So where does this idea of Hanukkah come in? I think it comes in here. Could it be that, somebody just put it in there as a scribe later on? Maybe, possibly, because you don't see it in the Hebrew. Or were they trying to help us to understand exactly what was going on, what was in their mind? Not that Yeshua was practicing any of this stuff or doing it, just like he didn't do the 6 water pots, just like there's so many other things that Yeshua used of the Pharisees that was just not true and not good. Yeshua's there not to celebrate this thing, not to do extra biblical things outside of what Moses said. He's there to rip them apart, to tell them, you are not my sheep. As a matter of fact, look at the next verse. And if you are the Messiah, say to us plainly, verse 25, he answered them, I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness concerning it. If you don't understand what all that you've said, you ain't never going to understand. In verse 26, but you do not believe. And here it is. Here it is, guys. Here it is. Because you are not my sheep. As I said to you, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them everlasting life. That's what Messiah came for this time. He's coming to conquer, not this time. And they shall by no means ever perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. Now, I am totally out of time, and I'm so sorry for going over time, but let me just end with this, guys. I want you to answer the question based on what we've heard, what we've kind of gone over, but the verses we've looked at, what we know of the holiday today, where we know where it comes from, where we know who instituted it, we know it's extra biblical. Would Yeshua be lighting a 9-branch Hanukkah? Would he be part of a festival of lights taken from the Saturnalia, from Rome, from the Festival of Lights? Would Yeshua be celebrating a second Sukkot outside of that which Moses instituted, connected to some sort of quasi-prophecy nobody's ever heard of out of Jeremiah? Would Yeshua be proposing a miracle that never happened as truth? Made up, not true, something later on. Would he be giving gifts on this day, spinning dreidels? Would Yeshua be doing that? Would he put up a Hanukkah bush? If Josephus didn't even know what the Festival of Lights was, do you think that Yeshua was doing it? I'm going to let you answer that question. I'm going to let you answer that question because I think you know. Guys, that is Yah's word for you tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me just do this real quick. I hope that you guys enjoyed that for tonight. Lots of stuff, lots of information. Go over it again, listen to it again. I'm not trying to, offend or beat up, but I'm trying to give truth out there. We need to understand truth. And listen, it is what it is. It is what it is. We want to follow the master, and we want to do it the best way we understand, the best way we know how, and listen to what the scripture actually says. He came not to destroy the law. He came to fulfill it, to do exactly what it says to do and show us how to do it as well. So guys, with that, join us tomorrow morning for our morning manna. And of course, this upcoming weekend on Saturday on the Sabbath, as we have another hidden manna. And we're going to continue with the Gospel of John. Some of the stuff you kind of already got a little bit of taste of it tonight, but we're going to go over it in much, much more detail. And we're going to talk about why Yeshua had to come and what the job was and why the job was what he had to do the first time. So we got lots of exciting stuff to talk about. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. And don't forget, guys, if you are not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that button, hit the red button and hit the bell. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the message. Give us a comment. Let us know where you're watching from. I see a couple of you guys on there already. Know where you're watching from. If you got questions, send them out. We'll do our best to answer them. Guys, have a great evening tonight. And as always, guys, shalom.